What is up, Scream Team? Zach Cherry here, and in this video, I'm going to break down Halloween Ends scene for scene, point out all of the hidden Easter eggs and connections to the past 12 films of the franchise that you might have missed, and just give you my overall opinion. Let's get into it. The film opens in Haddonfield on Halloween night 2019, exactly 1 year after the events depicted in Halloween's 2018 and Kills. Corey Cunningham, who typically does gardening work for the Allens, is hired by them at the last minute to babysit their young son Jeremy. Later in the evening, after having discussions about Michael Myers still being at large, Jeremy plays a prank on Corey where he locks him in the attic. Corey has a panic attack and violently tries to break down the door while Jeremy taunts him from the other side. As the Allens arrive back at home, they overhear Corey threatening Jeremy to let him out, and just as Corey is able to break through the door, the impact sends Jeremy flying backwards over the banister and falling to his death in front of his parents 3 stories below. Just to go over some of the Easter eggs in this opening scene and the credits, the big one, which a lot of people have noticed, is that the title font throughout the credits is blue. This is a callback to Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, where it was the exact same color and style. The opening credits also have this pumpkin motif, just like the other movies did, and whereas Halloween Kills had 12 pumpkins to represent the 12 films that had been released to date, this one only has 6, and they're kind of like exploding out of each other until it comes to the last one, which is just a solid pumpkin, no carvings or anything, that opens up. My personal interpretation of this is that it represents the 6 decades that Halloween movies have been released. Obviously, this is open to interpretation, so if you have a different theory, let me know, but that's what I'm going with for now. We also have a reference to the first movie and to John Carpenter in the fact that Corey is watching The Thing with Jeremy, although he's watching John Carpenter's Thing, and as we know in the original Halloween 1978, Annie was watching The Thing from Another World with Lindsey, and I guess Laurie was watching it with Tommy as well. So I just wanted to point out that this film has 4 writers, which is ridiculous to me because I think that this is not a good script. I'll just put that on the counter right now. Maybe not for the reasons you think. We'll get more into that later on, but just so you know, this is where we're at with the writing team. I do, however, like the opening mood of the movie, just how it's set with the kind of rockabilly that like the Haddonfield radio station playing over it, which is completely different from what we got in at least the last 2 movies. So it really sets the tone and it lets us know that this is going to be a weird movie. But for the most part, I really like this opening scene. I think that everything that they did very effectively. In particular, just setting up the character of Corey and building the audience's empathy for him. You know, we see that in just the way that we're experiencing his story, and we pretty much are with him for most of the movie, but just, you know, like how the other characters are very dismissive of him. It's easier to make a character that we empathize with when everyone else around them is a douchebag, especially Jeremy, who is awful. This scene also does a really good job building suspense. Unfortunately, I feel that Blumhouse showed us too much of their hand too soon, just by revealing so much of the plot before we even got a trailer, that I basically knew what this opening scene was going to be and that Michael Myers was not going to be in it. And then the other thing that I like is just sort of the establishing of the height of the house or the stairs right off the bat of the mom looking up the stairwell, which is a very classic shot seen in a lot of older horror movies, but it works here because it accentuates the distance of the fall that kid has to make. So I like points for that for sure. Fast forwarding to 2022, Laurie has moved on from the events of 2018 and, having gone through a lot of therapy, has learned how to not let fear rule her life. She's bought a home in suburban Haddonfield where she now lives with granddaughter Allyson and is writing her memoir of her survivorhood. Allyson, who has just gotten out of a relationship with a police officer named Doug, is also processing her grief in her own way and has since gotten a job as a nurse at Haddonfield Memorial Hospital. Meanwhile, Corey has become the town pariah, as once Michael disappeared after his last killing spree, the community searched elsewhere for motive and meaning as a way of coping with the tragedy. He currently works for his uncle Ronnie as a junkyard mechanic, who one day surprises him with a gift of an old motorcycle. Later on, while out on his lunch break, Corey is accosted by a group of high school hoodlums, where he cuts his hand after getting into an altercation with their leader Terry. Laurie, who's been observing the whole encounter, breaks up the fight, and after encouraging Corey to slash the bully's tire, she drives him to the clinic to get his hand treated. Okay, so as far as Easter eggs go in this section, the first thing that we see is that Laurie's memoir is called Stalkers, Saviors, and Samhain, or Samhain if you're reading it like Dr. Loomis does in Halloween 2. So Samhain is the Celtic festival which eventually became the Halloween holiday we know today, but it's also been referenced in the prior Halloween movies, like I said in Halloween 2 on the elementary school chalkboard, but it also shows up in Halloween 3 Season of the Witch with the character of Connell Cochran, who is a Celtic warlock who plans a mass sacrifice of children on the night of Halloween. The holiday is also central to the sixth movie, Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers, in which it's linked to the Curse of Thorn, which in that movie's canon was the force driving Michael to kill. And speaking of Halloween 6, and this is something that I don't know if it was intentional or not, but in sort of like the sequence of scenes that we see of Laurie talking about the tragedies that befell the town, we see two gunshot victims sitting in a red Jeep, which looks identical to the one that Tommy drives in that movie. We also see in newspaper clippings that the Myers house was destroyed, I guess by the townspeople, like between the events of the last movie and this one. And then also the woman that we see who has hung herself and she's wearing a devil costume, that is actually Oscar's mother, who we saw in Halloween Kills. Right off the bat, I was not impressed by kind of Laurie's narration. I just feel that's a very lazy writing device. And obviously, you know, she's writing her memoir, so it's part of that. But I feel like everything that she's writing is just more of her pontificating that meaningless rhetoric that we've heard her say in the last two movies. And I just think that it's a very weak entry point for her into this movie. You know, I've said this before, it's screenwriting 101, show, don't tell. And already this movie has disregarded that rule. But not completely, because I do think that, you know, the most effective moment that we see here is when Laurie gifts Allyson the necklace with her parents' wedding bands. And although it's a bit of a stretch to imagine that it took her 4 years to give her this and it just happened to be on the same week that the events of this movie were taking place, it's still just a nice character moment between the two of them. Even the other interactions between Allyson and Laurie, like nothing we see here is really pertaining to the plot, like Laurie burning the pie and all that. It's just sort of incidental to everything. Unlike, say, H2O, where, you know, you have the scene of Laurie and John having this meaningless banter at the beginning, but then it becomes more apparent what the themes are here and like the directions of the characters when we see that she's being too controlling and protective. And here it's just these characters going about their regular everyday routine. Like nothing is particularly interesting or special. It's also a bit jarring that arguably Laurie's 2018 Halloween was much more tragic than anything she endured in 1978. And while that movie gave her 40 years of trauma that put her in this place where she was closed off from the world and this gun fanatic and living in fear. And in this movie, just a mere 4 years after her daughter being killed, she's just living life. And that's great. Like, I love that for her, but it just does not feel balanced. I also made a note here to say that I'm not sure if Ronnie is Corey's stepdad or his uncle. The information that I read online cited him as being both, despite it not being mentioned in the movie. So for the sake of this breakdown, I'm just classifying him as Corey's uncle. Also, the marching band bullies, like... The writers were just picking from a grab bag of random archetypes to come up with this motley crew. And these guys aren't even intimidating. They're like 6 years younger than Corey, but somehow they're just like kicking his ass. I don't know. I feel like they could have come up with a more convincing set of teens. Like these guys are just not working for me. However, there is another reference to a vehicle from a past movie because the black convertible that is being driven by them is an homage to the same car that Tina's boyfriend Mike drives in Halloween 5. At the clinic, Corey meets Allyson, where she's assigned to clean up his wound, and after getting belittled by her boss, Dr. Mathis, she reveals to Corey that even though she's unhappy with her job, she's sticking around as she's been promised a promotion. Corey tells Allyson that he works as a mechanic, and after she mentions that she's been having car troubles, he insists on taking a look for her. The two end up flirting with each other, and Allyson makes the first move by asking him out on a date, to which Corey seems unsure about. A lot of people are complaining about the Allyson-Corey romance part of this movie, and I don't see what the problem is, really. Like, there's nothing wrong with a little character development. I get that it's not what you expect from a Halloween movie, but I mean, like, what did you want to see instead? The two of them just randomly coming together in some contrived and illogical scenario while Corey gets awkwardly close to her while talking about Michael Myers. It's a nice little meet cute, and I think that the two actors have great chemistry together, so I enjoy seeing their relationship unfold throughout the movie. I do have caveats, but for the most part, I'm fine with it. Later on at Laurie's house, Lindsey has come over for dinner, and Allyson calls her grandmother out for intentionally setting her up with Corey by bringing him to the clinic. For some reason, Allyson pretends to not be interested in dating anyone new, but Laurie encourages her to deal with her grief by finding someone who she can be sexually uninhibited with, and she suggests that she invite Corey to go with her to a Halloween-themed party that Lindsey is throwing at the bar where she works. Meanwhile, Corey is having dinner with his uncle Ronnie and his overbearing mother Joan, who, after assuming he got cut while on the job, criticizes both of them for Corey not taking proper care of his safety at work. Ronnie tells Corey not to tell his mother about the motorcycle, as he doesn't think she'll be able to handle the idea of him having it. So the scene with Laurie, Lindsey, and Allyson all together at the Strode house is kind of a pointless scene. I mean, it is nice to see these characters interacting and having a bond, but what does Lindsey even do in this movie? From what I understand, Lindsey was only supposed to be in Halloween Kills, but just because Kyle Richards got such a good response from audiences, they decided to put her in this movie, and for the most part, her role here does feel very shoehorned in, because all this scene does is remind us for a third time now that there's going to be a Halloween party. It also reiterates to us that Allyson was in a relationship, which we already knew when the guy pulled her over. There's a lot of fat that can be trimmed out of this movie, and I think this scene is a prime example of that, because this does nothing to further the story. Also, just in terms of the Corey dinner scene and all that, the only question I have is Joan Cunningham. Is she really campaigning to be the most hated Halloween character? Because there is a long lineup of people that you have to beat for that title. The next day, Allyson comes to Ronnie's junkyard to drop off her car, but tells Corey that the real reason she actually came was to see him. Meanwhile, Laurie runs into Frank at the grocery store, where the two catch up after having not seen each other for a while. She mentions to Frank that she started writing her memoir as per his idea, and that Allyson has started talking to Corey, who Frank seems to know and vouches for. The two have an awkward moment before Laurie leaves the store, where she's accosted by a woman in the parking lot who's revealed to be the sister of Sandra, Laurie's former neighbor, who after being attacked was left widowed and without her voice after the events shown in Halloween Kills. She personally blames Laurie for her sister's condition, claiming that none of it would have ever happened had she not provoked Michael to come after her. Affected by the encounter, Laurie has a small breakdown in her car, where Frank notices and comes over to comfort her. So the only Easter egg that I could find in this section of the movie is that there is a Muzak version of Don't Fear the Reaper playing in the supermarket. Now, Don't Fear the Reaper is obviously the Blue Oyster Cult song that we first heard in the original Halloween that is playing on the radio in Annie's car when she's driving Laurie to go babysit for the night. We're getting a lot more character stuff in this scene, and don't get me wrong, like, I like that this film is taking its time to let us get to know these people and get comfortable with their burgeoning relationships, but the scene at the junkyard sort of ends abruptly, and again, we're treading over the same things that have already been established, as Allyson had already texted Corey the previous scene to invite him to the party. So here, like, this is all very redundant. I don't know if, like, David Gordon Green just feels that this love story is too cerebral, that it needs to be incrementally spoon-fed to the audience. As for the stuff in the supermarket, I do like seeing this flirtation between Laurie and Frank, because this might be one of the most consistent through lines of this trilogy, and I like how Laurie even reverts back to her 17-year-old self as she's twirling her hair. But as soon as Frank starts throwing out these metaphors about cherry blossoms, I'm completely taken out of this scene. Like, this all feels so written. Like, it probably took all four of these screenwriters to come up with this cherry blossom metaphor. But the scene does kind of get back on track, because the two of them start to talk about Laurie writing her memoir, and then also Allyson seeing Corey, as because that at least pertains to the story. It's a good way to incorporate all of the characters into the same framework. We also carry on the same tradition that was last seen in Halloween Kills with Frank of retroactively bringing a character back from the dead. This time it is Sandra. But all I have to say is that Sandra's sister, who is awful, by the way, just really highlights the inconsistency of the Haddonfield townspeople over the course of this trilogy. Because first they're presented as being apathetic towards Laurie and the events that happened in 1978. Then they act like they've lived in fear for the last 40 years, despite the fact that Michael has been locked away this entire time. And now they're all about victim shaming, so it's almost like pick a lane. The only thing that would make sense here is if this trilogy is trying to highlight how fickle society can be, but the townspeople are never depicted as being flawed for their malleable nature, so it just seems like David Gordon Green presents them as being whatever he needs them to be for whatever particular theme he's trying to pound into the script. Later that night, Allyson and Corey go to the costume party at Lindsey's bar, where they engage in a very lively dance. Corey bumps into Mrs. Allen, who upon seeing him having a good time, blames him for her son's death and calls him evil, which sends him running out of the party. Allyson follows after him, saying that she knows what it's like to be labeled by the town as something she's not, but he laments that their pain isn't exactly alike, as people look at her as a survivor, while they look at him as a monster. As Corey takes off alone, a visibly upset Allyson returns home, where she wakes up Laurie by causing a ruckus, and after asking her grandmother to just let her be mad, she confesses to her that she did in fact like Corey. Okay, Easter eggs. This is a very tenuous one, but Deb is dressed up like a devil, which could be an homage to Sammy in Halloween 5. The man who plays the Flasher, that is actually Nick Castle, who was the original actor to play the Shape in the first Halloween movie. And he repeats the famous line that Linda says of, "See anything you like?" I was also getting Rob Zombie H2 vibes from that dance scene. And I'm sure I wasn't the only one, but I was certain that Corey was having a seizure. Not sure if this shot with Lindsey and Jeremy's mom was intentional, but I love how it's already been memed. And then on a more somber note, the scene between Corey and Allyson outside is actually really heartbreaking, because this movie presents a scenario where if these two were actually able to make a clean break out of this town, they could have had a happy existence. And that's what I truly believe would have happened for these characters if the town hadn't corrupted Corey. So just that I'm putting my cards on the table right now, that's what I think the reason behind Corey's evil is just the town. On his way home, Corey is once again accosted by the marching band bullies, who after getting aggressive with him, accidentally knock him over the side of an overpass. They flee the scene, and a shadowy figure grabs Corey and drags him into a sewer pipe. Corey wakes up the next morning, and while attempting to get out of the sewer, he's grabbed by Michael from behind a crack in the wall. Michael attempts to choke Corey to death, but after looking into Corey's eyes and apparently seeing into the last 3 years of his life, he lets him go instead. Corey escapes out of the sewer, but is confronted by a vagabond outside who claims to be Michael Myers and pulls a switchblade on him. He threatens Corey to go back into the sewer to retrieve the mask, but Corey is able to turn the blade around and ends up killing him instead. So 2 Easter eggs that I noticed here. The first is when we get the homage to Michael falling off of the balcony from the first movie, which we've seen many times. Obviously this time with Corey falling over the overpass. And then I think the sewer is a callback to Halloween Resurrection. I mean, there's plenty of rats in there, so I'm guessing that that's what Michael has been feasting on. I also just wanted to point out the score in this movie, which is once again composed by John and Cody Carpenter and Daniel Davies. And it's a little more understated than what they gave us in 2018 in Kills, but it does stand out in certain scenes. And I think that as far as the score goes, that has been one of the best parts of this new trilogy. We see here for the first time in the franchise that Michael takes prisoners. So him dragging Corey into the sewer does have this sort of Friday the 13th remake Jason vibe to it, which obviously is very inconsistent with the story since this movie is still linked to several of the other entries in the franchise. However, I did notice that there is a billboard for a missing girl, which might suggest that Michael, now being in a weakened state, knocks people out before bringing them back to his lair to kill him there. So it's more than likely that Michael was planning on killing Corey when he woke up, which means he was waiting behind that crack in the wall to do that. Now, one of the biggest problems I have with this movie, because I'm not super offended by Michael's limited screen time or kill count. Like, this is 40 minutes into the movie for him to show up for the first time. But the idea of him letting Corey go is absolutely jarring to me, because this storyline suggests that Michael is able to see into Corey's soul, or lack thereof, which is impossible since Michael has always been presented as having a lack of a conscience and having no empathy. So unless we're finding out now that there's a caveat to Michael's condition, as it were, in which he can telepathically communicate with like-minded people, this entire plot twist contradicts the integrity of John Carpenter and Deborah Hill's original conception of the boogeyman. The problem, though, is that I don't think Corey has darkness in him. And this is a question that is continuously brought up throughout the movie, but it's never sufficiently answered. So the only other explanation is that Michael has now supernaturally possessed Corey, or has somehow transferred part of his essence into him, which honestly sounds like some unused Halloween 5 ideas that never made it to the screen. This also goes against what was specifically laid out in Halloween 2018, and that we'll see again by the end of the movie, where Laurie reduces Michael to being nothing more than just an evil man. So both of these threads of Corey already having darkness inside him like Michael did, or just being supernaturally influenced by Michael, neither of them make any sense. And then immediately following this, none of it is even like thematically set into place with Corey killing the homeless man, as that entire bit is framed as though Corey killed him in self-defense. So I really don't know what to make of this. Allyson finds out at work that her coworker Deb was given the promotion instead of her, and later on at home, she's visited by a strange acting Corey, who Laurie spots through the window lurking outside behind a bush. Laurie notices something different in him, but doesn't say anything about it, and after telling the Strode women that he was jumped by the marching band bullies the night before, he apologizes for ditching Allyson and asks her to take a walk with him. The two of them break into the now abandoned house where Corey had accidentally killed Jeremy as a way of getting him to face the grief caused by what he had done. It's here where Allyson reveals to Corey that she had felt a connection to him long before they had even met, based on having heard his story and feeling his pain. Meanwhile, Laurie visits Joan Cunningham, presumably to get intel on Corey or work together to keep him and Allyson from seeing each other, but Joan lashes out at her instead and says that the town would have forgiven Corey long ago if it wasn't for Laurie's boogeyman disappearing and them needing to find a new one to replace him with. Okay, biggest reference in this part of the movie is when Laurie sees Corey outside her window / standing behind the bush. Obviously, this is a reference to the 1978 original, as that is kind of a combination of both the scenes where Laurie sees Michael standing in the bed sheets and then again when she's walking down the sidewalk and sees him behind the bush. In terms of Laurie recognizing the darkness in Corey's eyes, she has always been presented as this character who sees things while everyone else is blind to them. But for the movie to specifically tell me that whatever she sees right now is brand new to her, like she didn't see it in Corey's eyes the day before, that basically confirms to me that the suggestion here is that it is a supernatural element of Michael. In general, I feel like a lot of the scenes in this section of the movie are kind of empty. Like, they're not necessarily unfocused, but they all seem to stop short of a conclusion. Like, we're in mid-conversation and it's just like, okay, we're gonna go check over here now. And things like that. Like, it keeps the pace going, but it's definitely more fat that could have been trimmed to give this movie a shorter runtime. I also find it peculiar that Laurie is starting to lead this crusade against Corey, since if anything, the two of them seem to have more in common than anyone else, just for the way they've been ostracized by the community. So it's things like that that just makes Laurie very hard to connect with for most of the movie. Corey and Allyson go to a diner where they talk about what it would be like to leave Haddonfield, but she reveals that she's afraid of what might happen to her grandmother if she were to ever leave her on her own. Allyson's ex-boyfriend Doug interrupts them, where he taunts Corey, almost getting into a fight with him, until he eventually backs down and returns to his table. Later on, Doug follows Corey after he drops Allyson off at home, where he's then led to the underpass where Corey had his confrontation with Michael. Doug finds the body of the vagabond around, and after being instigated by Corey, tracks him down through the sewer pipe. Once there, Corey ambushes Doug and holds him down, while a visibly weakened Michael Myers takes out his knife to kill him, which somehow revitalizes his health. Only reference I can find here is that we find out that Doug's last name is Mulaney, which supposedly makes him the son of one of those awful bully kids from the 1978 flashback and Halloween Kills. Also, I have no idea what this is supposed to be. Like, it's either an imprint of Michael's mask in the wall or a stone carving of his mask. If someone can explain that to me, that would be very helpful. In terms of Allyson, I think that she is mostly a consistent character throughout this movie, even the whole trilogy, but there are a few times where she goes off course here. And one instance is how turned on she gets by Corey's bad boy energy. Obviously, I get that this is supposed to be setting up her wanting to run away from Haddonfield with him, but it all feels really forced, especially since the problems that Allyson is having are shown to be work-based, like stuff to do with her boss or her coworker, and none of it actually has anything to do with Laurie at all. If anything, her relationship with Laurie is presented as being very sweet and nurturing. You know, maybe if there was a seed planted earlier on where we see that there was some underlying resentment on Allyson's end towards Laurie, that would have made sense. But here, it all feels like it's part of this convenient plot contrivance that's just meant to throw some forced third act drama in later on. It also kind of undermines Allyson as a final girl when her grandmother can recognize Corey's darkness, but she can't. But in terms of everything that happens in the sewer, this is honestly the point where the movie gets so off the wall ridiculous for me that I can't help but just turn my brain off and enjoy the absurdity of what I'm watching as Corey and Michael tag team this guy. There are many things I never thought I would have seen in the Halloween franchise, but this is definitely one of them. The funny thing is that this is what people were expecting from Jamie Lloyd after the finale of Halloween 4. So it's just hilarious to me that now this is something that's being frowned upon. After helping Michael kill Doug, a confused Corey returns to the Strode house to see Allyson, and the two end up spending the night together. Laurie arrives home just in time to see them go upstairs, but doesn't notice Michael, who is also there watching her from behind a tree. The next day at work, Allyson is getting increasingly frustrated by her present situation when she notices the clear favoritism Deb receives from Dr. Mathis. Meanwhile, Laurie has gone to Lindsey's bar to talk to her about how she saw Michael in Corey's eyes, and they end up speaking to Jeremy's father, who's at the bar playing pool. He tells them how he wanted to forgive Corey for what had happened and recounts to them how he tried to talk to him the previous day, but was unnerved by the same vacancy in his eyes that Laurie had described, and questions whether the town had done that to him, or if it was something that was always there. This whole block of the movie is filler. All of this could have been cut out. I don't know how many reminders we need that Allyson hates her job and also that her boss and coworker are awful. And then the scene in the bar where Laurie goes to talk to Lindsey, like that was all unnecessary. And I have a feeling that this was just left in because of Kyle Richards' popularity and wanting to have more Lindsey in the movie. But this is the last time that we see her, and this scene isn't even about her. The focus instead is more on Jeremy's dad, and all he's doing is reiterating the same things we've already been told in a very ham-fisted way. And then even worse, the movie is once again posing a question which not only does it not have the answer to, but also has no intention of even presenting any further evidence for us to formulate an answer to. And also, it's way too convenient that Jeremy's dad would decide to talk to Corey on the day that Corey supposedly got infected by Michael Myers. So again, like, we don't even know if that exchange would have gone any differently had Corey never encountered Michael, or if Jeremy's dad had decided to talk to him literally any day before that. If anything, I think that Corey is more in line with the Rob Zombie version of Michael Myers, not stylistically, but just in terms of him becoming a killer based on his nurture, while John Carpenter's version of Michael Myers has always been a killer based on his nature. Later that night, Dr. Mathis takes Deb to his house, where we find out that she got the promotion by sleeping with him. Corey shows up dressed in his mechanic's coveralls and the scarecrow mask seen previously at the party and kills Mathis outside by his swimming pool. Deb stumbles upon the murder, and after locking herself inside and trying to call the cops, Michael sneaks up from behind her and impales her to the wall with his knife. After this, Corey picks up Allyson, where they sneak up to the rooftop radio tower at the local station, where they're discovered by DJ Willie the Kid. He recognizes both of them for their connection to the town's tragic history and insults and threatens them, which precipitates Allyson to agree to running away from Haddonfield with Corey. Laurie watches them from a distance, and when Corey goes home to tell his mom and uncle that he's leaving, his mother blames Allyson for corrupting him, and she strikes him before kicking him out of the house, while his uncle instead remains passively supportive. Not sure if this was really a reference or not, but I did want to note that Dr. Mathis receives the second corkscrew death in the Halloween franchise, the first one being Charlie in H2O. We also see when Corey jumps off the radio station's roof and falls down, he sits up in the same way that Michael does. The character of Willie the Kid could be a reference to Barry Sims from Halloween 6, where just like Willie, we also would regularly hear his broadcast throughout the movie until he showed up in person later on. Other than that, the radio tower where Corey and Allyson go was last seen in the 1978 flashback of Halloween Kills. I do want to say that the kill scene here is a nice little set piece. Not that I think anyone was surprised by the revelation that the doctor and nurse were sleeping together, but despite this being kind of devoid of any tension or horror, mostly due to the fact that these are very unsympathetic characters, I find the kill of Dr. Mathis to be very disturbing. There's just something about it that gives it this authentic feel. Like, this is the closest depiction to real life violence that we might see in this franchise. You can even see the silhouette of Corey stabbing him as Deb first comes outside, and if there's something that David Gordon Green is good at, it's paying attention to background detail. As for Deb's kill, although I like the action leading up to it, I think that the kill itself is pretty pedestrian. I mean, we've seen this so many times before. Like, this is the most overused kill in the Halloween franchise, of just Michael pinning someone against the wall, followed by his trademark head tilt. I would have much rather seen something new, or at least like a variation on that. There's also a very strange scene transition here, and I mostly think that the transitions in this movie are really well done, especially in comparison to 2018 and Kills. But the one exception is when we cut to Corey on his motorbike, because I was fully expecting to see Michael riding on the back and not Allyson. And as bonkers as that would have been, it would have elevated this movie to a level of infamy that I think would have eclipsed any other questionable directions this franchise has ever taken. But at this point, I'm pretty much game for any sort of weirdness that it wants to throw at me. The next day, October 31st, Corey wakes up in the abandoned Allen house, to which Laurie has followed him. She proclaims to him that there are two kinds of evil. One that exists as an external force that threatens the well-being of the tribe, and another that lives inside us, like a sickness or an infection. She believes Corey has the latter of the two, and claims that it's the more dangerous one, because there's no way of knowing whether we're infected. She tells Corey she wants to help him, but she also forbids him from being with Allyson. He proclaims that if he can't have her, then no one will, and taunts Laurie by saying that she should surrender to the feeling she had when she first looked into Michael's eyes, and calls her out for secretly hoping that he'll come back for her. One interesting thing about this scene that I noticed is that Corey is not only drawn back to the place where he took his first life, but that he would also choose to sleep on the very spot where Jeremy died. I guess that's a parallel that they're making to Michael, just in the sense that we always saw him going back to his childhood home and standing in front of the window, which is where he killed his sister. I think this would have been more impactful, though, if they had cut the scene earlier where they had already come to the house, and instead actually showed Corey kind of like breaking into the abandoned house for the first time after his mother kicked him out. I even don't mind Laurie's rhetoric here, even though she's basically paraphrasing the same thing that Jeremy's dad had already said earlier. But again, if they could have cut that scene out and just left this one in, it would have made the movie leaner, it would have made the themes feel less forced, and it would have at least worked more effectively within the context of the story for that conversation to be exclusively had between Corey and Laurie. Also, Corey and Laurie, could they have not have given him a different name? But I digress, because my main problem with this scene, which is also inherently a problem with Laurie throughout this whole movie, is that she's kind of postured portrayed as being the villain of the story, at least from Corey's perspective. And that's primarily been the perspective that we've been shown throughout. So when Laurie tells him that she wants to help him, I fully believe that she does, and I'm rooting for that to happen. But then in the same breath, she forbids him from seeing Allyson. And I don't know if Laurie is just too headstrong, but like anyone should know that when you're dealing with a person who is potentially dangerous, the last thing you're going to want to tell them is what they can and cannot have. So in a way, Laurie is kind of responsible for everything that escalates with Corey after this, as she full-on provokes him here. In that regard, maybe Sandra's sister isn't wrong in victim shaming her. The problem is that Laurie never answers to any of this and faces no consequences. So again, the movie is loading itself up with themes, and not a single one of them have landed so far. There's also another possibility here that Corey hallucinated Laurie being there, and that's why she disappeared suddenly. Honestly, this might make sense since Laurie's entire argument here is kind of primitive when, like, Laurie, as we know her, is a very complex individual. So if this was a hallucination of Corey's, like, it does make sense that that would be his interpretation of her. Corey calls Allyson and tells her that Laurie is trying to kill him and asks her to run away with him that night. He then returns to the sewer and, after having a tussle with a not yet fully healed Michael, removes his mask and takes off with it. Meanwhile, Allyson goes home to pack, but Laurie tries to stop her by telling her that Corey is not only going down a dark path, but also that he's a huge danger to her. Allyson calls Laurie out for having not actually moved on with her life and accuses her of being hell-bent on making everyone else as miserable as she is, before blaming her paranoia as the reason behind the death of her friends and parents. Okay, the scene of Corey and Michael wrestling over the mask like two disgruntled little siblings is probably the most unintentionally hilarious part of this movie. I know most people's criticisms for Halloween Ends have to do with the treatment of Michael Myers, but honestly, I just found this to be a breath of fresh air. Like I mentioned in my initial review for this movie, I had no expectations whatsoever. I did not need this movie to be anything for me, as it basically was a blank slate. There are 11 other interpretations of Michael Myers that we can fall back on if this one fails. So I don't see any harm in what they've done here, especially since this is the end of this particular timeline. I do understand people's anger and frustration though, like, don't get me wrong, and you're justified in that. I just personally feel that this franchise has done a lot worse, and I think a lot of people are forgetting about this particular scene. In terms of Allyson's confrontation with Laurie, none of this makes any sense. There's literally been no tension between them. There's been no build up to this moment. Corey, who is someone Allyson has known for like 3 days, tells her that her grandmother is trying to kill him, and she immediately believes him. We're also once again having Laurie repeat the same thing to Allyson that she already said to Lindsey about seeing Michael in Corey's eyes. So just another example of why that scene should have been cut out, and then this one should have been left in, since this is the moment in the movie where that proclamation would have resonated the most effectively. On the other hand, it's hard to empathize with Laurie's position since she really is just going off of a gut feeling. Obviously, we as an audience know that she's right since the movie has shown us as much, but since there's been no groundwork laid out for us to access and understand her psyche, her actions here just make her come off as being extremely self-righteous. So again, what would have been a more meaningful crusade for Laurie would be to fight for Corey. And just knowing that that would be near impossible for her to achieve, it would at least make us feel invested in her fight. I see Laurie's character arc throughout this movie as being mostly a failure because of that. And this entire argument between her and Allyson is completely pointless, as none of this drama was even earned. Compare that to H2O, where Laurie and John have their blow up on the street. All of that made sense, and it was all done efficiently and effectively in the first half of the movie. And as much as I enjoy Jamie Lee Curtis's portrayal of Laurie in this movie, I think that her performance in H2O is infinitely better because she had a much more well-rounded and thematic through line. Corey tracks down the marching band bullies and vandalizes their car in order to lure them to the junkyard. Once there, he locks them in and starts killing them one by one, leaving the leader of the group, Terry, to go to the office to get help from Ronnie. Ronnie leaves Terry in the office with a shotgun to protect himself, but when he goes outside to check things out, he's confronted by his nephew who's holding onto Michael's mask. Terry comes outside and shoots at Corey, but Ronnie gets in the way and is killed instead, where Corey then puts on the mask and proceeds to kill Terry and the remaining bullies before driving off in a tow truck. Now taking on the guise of the Shape, Corey continues his killing spree, first returning home to stab his mother to death, and then going to the radio station where he kills Willie the Kid and the station's receptionist before setting fire to both the building and the radio tower. In terms of Easter eggs, this movie has a very noticeable Stephen King vibe to it. For instance, the idea of Michael dwelling in the sewer like Pennywise, but there are also a lot of parallels to his story Christine, which was adapted into a film by John Carpenter. The main character in that movie, Corey Cunningham, even shares the same last name with Corey, and a lot of these homages can be seen especially with the marching band bullies. In terms of references to the past Halloween movies, we obviously get the POV shot of taking the knife out of the drawer, and then also we do see Corey driving a tow truck around town, which is very similar to the one that Michael drives in Halloween 4. I know there's been some criticism for the amount of off-screen violence in this movie, and I'm sure there will be an extended cut released like there was for Halloween Kills, but I still feel that for some of those off-screen kills, there is a certain visceral effectiveness for what we don't see or what we're only shown the aftermath of, and sometimes it's the horror that we don't see that is the most scary. And I've already talked about how basically all of the victims are unsympathetic characters whose deaths we really aren't supposed to care about or feel bad for at all. Even the receptionist could fall under that blanket just with the snotty way she greets Corey at the station, but you'll notice that Corey doesn't kill Ronnie, who is probably the most sympathetic character of the movie, and it doesn't appear that he was even going to kill Ronnie. So obviously I think it would have effectively severed any empathy the audience had for Corey if he had done this, but I still find it to be an interesting decision because even throughout all of this, I'm still rooting for Corey. It doesn't mean that I like what he's doing, but I think that if this movie has done anything successfully, it's made me care about this person, which is very impressive since we were only just introduced to him with this installment. Allyson goes to the diner where she made plans to meet Corey, but he doesn't show up, so she goes searching for him instead. Meanwhile, back at home, Laurie, who started drinking again, is trying to get a hold of Allyson, who won't take her calls. Seemingly distraught, she goes upstairs to her office, where she pulls a gun out of her safe before calling the police to report a suicide in her home. Corey arrives just in time to seemingly witness Laurie shoot herself, but she had only played a trick on him by shooting into a pumpkin instead, and when his guard is momentarily lowered, she surprises him from behind the door, where she shoots him several times, sending him falling backwards over the upstairs railing. After unloading the rest of her gun into the wall, she dares Corey to try and kill her, but as Allyson arrives at the house, he stabs himself in the neck, which leaves Allyson to believe that Laurie had killed him. Allyson kneels over a dying Corey as she screams at her grandmother, who has now regressed to a fragile emotional state, where Allyson then takes off, leaving Laurie all alone as the real Michael Myers sneaks in through the back door. Michael picks up his mask from off the floor, but as he goes to pick up the knife as well, Corey suddenly wakes up as though to keep him from taking it back, only for Michael to snap his neck, killing him for real. In terms of Easter eggs here, I don't really know if this counts as one, but the photograph on Laurie's kitchen wall of her with Annie and Linda, that was originally a behind the scenes production photo from the first movie, but I like how it works here because it seems like a picture that she actually would have. And then also another thing that ties this back to the original is that Laurie is wearing the exact same outfit in this scene as she did in the finale of that movie. Anyway, there's a lot going on here, so just to get a little critical of the writing, it really felt like they didn't know what they were doing at this point and needed to tie up loose ends before moving on to the big showdown between Laurie and Michael. First of all, there are so many things that are completely out of character for Laurie in this scene, because there is no way that she would waste her ammunition by firing the gun into the wall, but then also to throw the knife back down on the floor after she's taken it out of Corey's neck. She just spent the entire movie trying to convince convince everyone else that whatever Michael had is now in Corey. So why would she not think that there's a chance that Corey could get back up and grab that knife? I mean, she's been through this 7 times now. I mean, granted, different timelines, but like Jamie Lee Curtis has been through this. She should have known better and spoken up. Those are mostly just minor gripes though, because the biggest problem here with everything really is that we spent an entire movie building up Corey's character only to give his story no conclusion, while Laurie, on the other hand, gets to have this big finale without any build up to it at all. So Corey basically just became the mini boss battle of this movie. I will say, however, that I was surprised when Corey stabbed himself in the neck. I did not see that coming, but still, it's not the cathartic send-off to his character that we should have had. Bottom line here is that all roads lead to Michael, and in the end, it just becomes the same thing all over again, which just begs the question, what was the point of the story? Laurie hides in the pantry as Michael comes looking for her, but she surprises him before he can find her, and a brutal fight ensues between the two of them in her kitchen. At first, Michael seems to have an advantage over her, but Laurie is able to gain the upper hand, and after pinning him down to the table using several knives, she pushes her fridge over top of him to hold him in place. She then stabs him again before pulling off his mask, and takes back her power by declaring that he's no boogeyman, but rather just a regular man who's about to take his last breath. From there, she slowly slits his throat from end to end and stands close as she watches him begin to bleed out. However, Michael rips one of his hands free from the knife that's pinning it down and uses it to grab Laurie by the neck in a last-ditch effort to take her down with him. As he starts to choke the life out of her, she surrenders to his powers, like Corey had told her she should, and has flashbacks to every encounter she's ever had with him. Just then, Allyson comes rushing in after being called by Frank, who had alerted her to the suicide call that was received earlier. She grabs Michael's arm, which releases his hand from Laurie's neck, and breaks it over the side of the table, proclaiming that she's not going to let her grandmother go out this way. With Laurie now free of his grasp, she takes a knife and slits Michael's wrist, causing him to bleed out even more as the two Strode women stand over him until he's finally dead. Easter eggs in this scene. Well, more so trivia for this, but this movie, I mean, obviously features Michael's lowest kill count with just 3 people, which was the Mulaney guy, Nurse Deb, and Corey. We have another callback to the original with Laurie hiding in the pantry, which obviously is a reference to her hiding in the closet at the end. She is a little bit more prepared this time, but in both cases she did use distractive measures, as here she's got the microwave going, but in the original she just opened those balcony doors, so she's definitely stepped up her game. When Laurie takes out the knife and holds it in front of Michael's face and you get the reflection of his mask on the blade, that could be a reference to the poster art for Halloween's 5, 6, and Resurrection. We also have the garbage disposal bit, which is a reference to H2O, when the character Charlie drops the corkscrew down the drain. And then Laurie holding Michael's hand was also seen before in H2O, even though that wasn't him, and also in Halloween 4 with Jamie and Michael. I have to say that while this showdown is emotionally underwhelming, it does work really well on a technical level, just in terms of choreography, Jamie Lee Curtis performing her own stunts, and of course James Jude Courtney, who I feel deserves all of the accolades despite his limited screen time. I've come to accept that there really is no perfect final showdown between Michael and Laurie. I mean, I guess you could say that the original Halloween was that, even though Dr. Loomis technically saved the day, but it would have been nice had there been a confrontation that had the emotionality and theatrical appeal of H2O with the gravitas and suspense of 2018 and the high-octane energy we see here. Frank arrives at the Strode house where Allyson declares that Michael is not dead enough, and with the acceptance and participation of the Haddonfield police force, Michael's body is tied to the roof of Allyson's car and driven to the junkyard. The entire entire town comes out to follow them in a funeral procession where the past surviving victims of Michael's wrath join along as well. Once at the junkyard, Michael's body is carried over to an industrial shredder where Laurie pushes it in, destroying him completely as he's chewed up in the teeth of the machine. First of all, Allyson saying that Michael wasn't dead enough is probably the smartest line anyone has spoken in any of these films. And honestly, let's hope that Michael isn't supernatural, because we do not need a sequel where some dog goes to the junkyard and resurrects Michael by pissing fire on his pureed remains. Again, it's also very disappointing that Lindsey had her last scene way before this, because she's not even among the Haddonfield residents seen at the end. It was nice to see Julian for a quick second, but Lindsey was done dirty in this movie. Like, we don't even get a sprinkling of where she lands after all is said and done, which makes no sense given how prominent a role they've given her in this timeline. And then also, did the townspeople really deserve this victory? Like I said, they've been so inconsistent, and if anything, their actions created Corey's evil. The next day, Laurie and Allyson talk about Corey, where Allyson accepts that her grandmother was right about him, as Laurie says that he was consumed by evil. Now alone, Allyson continues with her plan of leaving Haddonfield anyway, and is finally okay with letting Laurie heal on her own terms. Sometime later, as Laurie is finishing up work on her memoir, Frank comes to visit her, and the movie concludes with the two of them sitting on her front porch, as she appears to finally be open to the idea of moving on with her life and putting her trauma behind her once and for all. In terms of Easter eggs for the final scene, we get the book ending of the still shots of the areas that Michael inhabited throughout the movie, specifically in Laurie's house, which is exactly how they did it at the end of the original movie, although here there is a peaceful, calming aura instead, like the evil is finally gone. And then again, as we had already heard the Muzak version in the supermarket earlier, the film closes out with Blue Oyster Cult's Don't Fear the Reaper. Of course, this movie has to end with more Laurie narration. We also have to hear Allyson give Laurie the whole "you were right" speech, which, even though she was, I don't feel like Laurie particularly earned that validation. Same goes for the news broadcast where they call her a hero. I definitely think she's a survivor and a final girl and does not deserve to be victim shamed, but really, like, a hero, I don't know about that. I don't completely hate the ending though. Like, the only thing that really pisses me off is that we get another cherry blossom metaphor before we close things out. But I do appreciate that Laurie finally gets to have a happy ending. Like, every movie where she's made it to the end, she has not been left in a good place, psychologically or legally. And yes, I am including the Scout Taylor Compton version in that assessment of Laurie. I think I still prefer the ending of H2O, even though Resurrection ruined everything, but otherwise that was just a very succinct way of bringing closure to the franchise at that point. I've mentioned a lot of issues I have with this movie, and while I think they're absolutely a detriment to this film's enjoyability, I still think this is my favorite of the David Gordon Green timeline. That doesn't mean that I think this is a good movie, far from it, if anything, but this is so offbeat and audacious in its approach that I can't help but find myself liking it for the more weirder aspects of it. It also moves along much more consistently than the previous two installments. There's better scene transitions. The story flows better than it did in 2018 and Kills. I'm not saying that the story is better per se. It's just presented in a more direct way, which makes it more accessible to me. Maybe if they had introduced Corey in 2018 and set up these ideas then, this could have been a more cohesive trajectory as an individual timeline. But all in all, I find this to be a failure as a trilogy. But as a standalone film, it works enough for me, and even though it's far from perfect, I don't hate it. That's the main thing. Like, I feel like if you have a Halloween movie and you don't hate it, it's done a successful enough job, and it's definitely not as bad as Resurrection. I want to thank a few of my Patreon supporters like Steve, Andrew Hoekstra, T. Samuels, Sean Maddox, and Jen. If you want to check out even more Halloween-related content, you can head over to one of these playlists right over here. Until next time, I've been Zach Cherry, and I'll be right back.